Okay, good evening everybody. Welcome to Cabinet. Apologies, I've got Councillor Poulter who's representing the Council elsewhere this evening, Councillor Grimmadell and Ralston. Do we have any other apologies? I'd like to welcome Councillor Eldritt, Councillor Skelton, Councillor Graves and Federico and Sonia, the Deputy Mayor, Youth Mayor and Deputy Youth Mayor. I hope you're enjoying your role so far, and I hope you'll continue to do so and be involved in lots of meetings, and you're very welcome tonight. Late items. Sorry. Ralston. Late items, we've got an exempt item which we'll deal with at the end of the agenda. And receipt of petitions, item 3, we don't have any. Item 4, identification of urgent items to which calling will not apply. We don't have any. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Item 6, minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of April 2018. Note those. Okay. Item 7, recommendations from the Executive Scrutiny Board. Appendix 2, which has been circulated, I believe. We're not changing the format of the previous administration. We'll deal with each set of recommendations per item as we move along the agenda. Okay. Item 8, minute extract from the Regeneration and Housing Board, Inward Investment Marketing Derby. Do we have any comments on that? Don?
Thank you, Chair. This report has been referred to Cabinet from our Regeneration and Housing Board meeting that was held on the 20th of March, recommending that Marketing Derby be formally consulted in future on planning applications to give an inward investment perspective to the planning process. There are 2 recommendations set out in the report, Chair. The first one is to receive the report from the Regeneration and Housing Board. The recommendation is actually set out in Appendix 2, and to ask officers to go away and consider the recommendation and work some papers up and bring that recommendations back to a future Cabinet meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Eldritt?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to speak really in support of the recommendation that was passed at the Executive Scrutiny meeting last night, where I think we had a good discussion about this item. And I think the general consensus was that there was no need for any further work on this, that the Regeneration and Housing Scrutiny Board had had a good discussion, and that in terms of doing future work on what an economic development board or advisory committee would look like, that actually the Conservation Area Advisory Committee provides a suitable template for that, and that the Economic Development Board could be based on that, and as such to save time and effort rather than getting officers to go back and work up proposals, that actually that we could just go ahead and establish that board straight away. So I just wanted to speak in favour of that recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other Councillor Skelton?
Thank you. Just on the point of how we actually bring this new body into being, it would seem to me sensible to progress that alongside the work that's being done to move us towards the committee system. Obviously, we have to devise what various committees are going to be, their remits, etc. This would seem to me be very similar work, and perhaps ought to be done at the same by the same working group.
I think what I'll say about that is the planning structure falls outside of the committee system in the same way that licensing will. There will be sort of integration in some respects in terms of whatever is we decide to move forward with the committee system, so there will be buy-in from that, but I think we do have to be careful to separate the two. What I would say is I note the Scrutiny Board's recommendations, and I think they can be taken in consideration moving forward. in regards to this issue, I would put to Cabinet if there's no other contributions to accept the report.
Need a recommendation of council if you're moving it forward.
Okay, sorry.
Need a recommendation of council.
And it will need a recommendation of council if we move this forward. Agreed? Okay, item 9. Christine, would you like to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that this is one of the most difficult reports that I've ever had to bring to members. Obviously, I think you're all aware the A52 Wyvern Transport Improvement Scheme has been in preparation for some time now. It's designed to provide significant highway benefits on a congested part of Derby's principal road network, and it will also provide new and improved access for sustainable transport modes and for new employment opportunities at the Derby Triangle development site. But it's extremely unfortunate and regrettable that I have to report to Cabinet that since the main project work started on site, there have been very significant and unforeseen cost increases in relation to the work carried out to date. And it is forecast that there will be further cost increases before the project is complete. And that also means that there will be delays in the implementation. The work was due to be complete by March next year. The work started on site, the main work in October, and at that time it was estimated that it would cost in the order of £15 million. We did go to Cabinet in March 2018 to seek some further funding towards complementary works that it was felt would be appropriate to deliver at the same time. But what has happened since then is that significant issues have emerged with the project, and we simply are not in a position to be able to say how much the project is going to cost to complete. The revised projection, which we aim to provide to Cabinet in September, is indicating it could be in the order of 30 million. Clearly, it's a complex situation. Cabinet and senior officers have already begun an internal investigation through our internal audit team, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And we have also been reviewing the governance, and we're also seeking to commission external engineering experts to provide advice and review the design and the cost estimates as we move forward, so that we can get assurance in the delivery of the remainder of this project. But this report is essentially to bring as soon, at the earliest opportunity, the situation to members, and also to request some additional funding as an interim measure into the project at this stage, so that we can ensure that we can continue to deliver any work that is required, but also to ensure that we can deal with our contractual commitments that are already made through the contract works to date. So a number of recommendations, 2.1 through to 2.7. What I would say is that following executive scrutiny recommendation last night, we've prepared some additional information through the confidential part of the agenda, which refers to recommendations 2.5 and 2.6. So I don't think we can deal with all of those at this time. But I think that's probably as much as I should say at the moment, Chair.
Councillor Graves.
Thank you. I think from the outset we have to accept that this is an absolutely disgraceful situation. For a project that was estimated at £15 million to be now estimating at £30 million is not really acceptable for the members of the public, the taxpayers of this city. People are going to find it very difficult to understand how a project has doubled in such a short space of time. At the scrutiny meeting last night, there were some very perplexing bits of information that we didn't understand. It wasn't for us to delve into that, because we believe that the investigation is important to go through to reveal how we've come about at this situation. One of the concerns that I have is that we're not being played by our own contractors, because this seems to be, to me, a situation where we can be taken advantage of, and I'm hoping that we are doing everything possible to ensure that that's not taking place. I think I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Don, would you like to respond to Councillor Graves' contribution?
Yes, Chair. Well, other than saying that everything that is included in the paper and what will come back to the Cabinet in September, coincidentally around that time, the investigation that we've set up through our internal audit service will also report back at that stage, and included in that report will set out very clearly from an end-to-end process basis, from this early decision making as to how we've got in this position. It'll be very clear and open and transparent in that report.
I will have something to say to contribute to that, Councillor Graves, but I'm just going to give Councillor Eldred an opportunity to contribute.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to start with that, we as the Labour Group have written to the Acting Chief Executive calling for there to be an independent external investigation into this, as Councillor Graves called, complete disaster. I think when you're talking about the scale of overspend and how much this project has run away by, and the fact that from start to end you're looking at 100% potential cost increase, if not more, then I think the very least that the public can expect is that any investigation that takes place is external to the council, independent of the council and public, so that taxpayers can really be assured of what has happened, what has gone wrong, and how we can make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. So we were very disappointed last night when the Executive Scrutiny Committee did not support our recommendation to move this to be an independent investigation external to the council. We will continue to push for that, and we believe that is the right way to go, and we believe it's the least that the public of Derby deserve, and we will be taking that to full council as well. So just to kind of make everybody aware that this doesn't we're not going to leave it here. Appreciate some of the comments that have been made about the investigation internally, but I think that, for the sake of the people of Derby, that should be made public and independent. That's the first thing. Just, I think, coming to this report, there was some very robust discussion about this report last night, which clarified some of the detail and didn't clarify some of the detail. And I think for me, the key with these papers is whether or not they provide enough information for you as a cabinet to be able to make good decisions. And when you're talking about the decision to spend an additional £7.65 million, you really want to make sure that you've got all the information you need to make that decision, because that is public money, that is the people of Derby's money. And I don't think that this report, and we as a Labour Group don't think that this report does contain the kind of information that you need as cabinet to make robust decisions. And it was a bit disappointing that we needed to put that forward as a recommendation to Executive Scrutiny last night to get more information on this before you could make a decision. So I fully, those recommendations in the Executive Scrutiny report are really important. Part of that, just to break it down, so there is no detail in the report about what the cost for the additional support and the technical report that Christine referenced. There's no estimate for what that will cost. That's not in the breakdown of costs. There's no breakdown or detail of the specifics of the 7.65 million beyond the contingency, $1 million of that being contingency. There's no breakdown of those costs. And also, even with the internal investigation, which we don't think is the right way to go ahead, there isn't really any information in this report about the scope of that investigation, who's going to be running that information. Some of that information was provided last night at the meeting, but it's not in this report. So I think the question that you have to ask yourselves as Cabinet is, do you have enough information contained here to make a good decision, and bearing in mind that you are going to be committing £7.65 million of Derby's people's money to this project at the very least. Thank you, Chair.
Don, Christine, would you like to respond to any of those points raised before I give an overview of where we are with regards to the investigation?
I think if I can just come back on the costs. I appreciate that everybody wants lots of information. In a sense, we've brought this report as soon as we practically felt that we could, knowing that there would probably be some information that we weren't able to provide. But it was such an important issue that we felt it should be brought to Cabinet as quickly as possible. So, you know, the information that we have provided additionally in the pink papers was requested last night at scrutiny, and so it is there and will be able to be considered by members. In relation to the point about no estimate for the professional fees for the experts, well, we don't have them on board yet. We haven't. We're in discussion with them at the moment, and therefore, again, I don't have that information to present. But what I'm saying is that this is what we believe is required to go forward, and what is proposed within the budget here is sufficient to cover that and more, obviously. So I think we're just trying to be as open as we can about the difficulties that we are in, you know, I appreciate the need for information from everyone, but if we're not in a place to give it, then we're just not able to.
Councillor Skelton.
Thank you. Obviously, I think most people would imagine that multiple issues have gone wrong here, not just one thing for the scale of the overspend. Likewise, someone somewhere must have known, I would imagine some months ago, that this was happening or starting to happen, because the size of this overspend just doesn't happen overnight. It develops over a period of time. As far as going to an external investigation, I mean, that very much depends what internal audit find, I would imagine, really. If they find that obviously things need to be dealt with by other bodies, then obviously they have to be. But it would be interesting to know how much, you know, a full-blown external investigation would cost on top of what internal audit are doing. I mean, I personally do have confidence that our own internal audit, i.e. East Midlands Audit Partnership, will do a thorough job. And I want to put that on record. It seems not everybody thinks that, but I do.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. So this is an inherited problem we're having to deal with, and deal with it we will. I think we need to state the fact that there is not an option to not fund the A52 project. You know, it was one of the first questions that we asked officers when this landed on our desk the day after taking control, the day we took control. You know, do we have to do this? Can we spend this money? Is it justified? Is it required? And the answer is yes, whichever way you look at it. This project must be delivered for the city. You have to be very careful at this stage not to draw any conclusions as to what has gone wrong. We know multiple things must have gone wrong for us to be facing this situation, a very regrettable situation, a very costly situation for the taxpayer of this city. But what I want to do is really give you hopefully some confidence about where we are currently in terms of the investigation. Obviously it's at an early stage, but I wanted to run through what we have in place, where we're headed, to give you some assurance as to the way forward. So, as we know, we have an internal investigation via the internal audit team. If they require resources or seek to bring in expertise, external expertise to support that investigation, then they will do that. They will seek via senior officers to procure that assistance. So that's the first thing that is happening right now. At the moment, my understanding is that it's early days. There hasn't been any requests for extra resources or assistance, but that picture may change as we move forward. We're also commissioning expert engineering advisors to review the designs and cost estimates, and this is about making sure that there's a robust plan in place moving forward, because as Councillor Graves, Councillor Skelton, Councillor Eldred have already said, this is a significant amount of money to be investing in this project at this time, more or less doubling the previously thought cost. So we need to have absolute confidence that as we move forward that money is going to deliver this project. with the amount of money that the officers are telling us that it will cost now. And that is really important, to having that expert advisors to review the designs and cost estimates moving forward. Now, their work will be their activity and reports will provide evidence that the project and delivery plan is robust, and that will be fed back to members for independent challenge. And of course, audit and accounts will have a key role to play in that process as we move forward. And of course, as has been said, our external auditors are fully aware of the situation and the actions that we are currently taking as a council, and are being fully consulted as we move forward. So I think in conclusion, that gives you an overview of where we are in terms of the structure of the investigation. I think it's very robust and very, very thorough, but it does have the ability to bring in extra resources if required to ensure that we do get to the bottom of this and find out what has happened, what has gone wrong, and lessons are learned. Now, in conclusion, though, I heard Councillor Repton talk about open and transparency. Well, we will be, because in regards to the conclusion and the ongoing work, of course we'll be open and transparent. And it's our intention to make sure that the end result of this, the reports, the conclusions, are brought to a future full council. We're not in the business of burying reports, however negative they may be. We need to learn from this, and the public deserve explanations as to what's gone wrong, and that's our intention. So, are any other contributions? Deputy Mayor, Youth Mayor.
Right, I just want to, first of all, we've all been quite dreary tonight. I just want to first come out in support of this project from our part, I believe, yeah. But I do have a couple of questions. So in the table 2, where you have a summary of all the proposals, you combine the complementary work with that I presume is on track and not overspending as much as this current project is. I'm quite perplexed. Why is it combined?
Christine?
Yeah, so it's combined because it's going to be delivered through the same contract, and so what the complementary works are things that we will add in, and they will be incorporated within the detailed design. So that's why we've added it in. And I think the other thing to say is that there were some other complementary works that are going to be considered as part of the design, and that's why the cost, in a sense, we think is going to be in the order of 30 million. So it's not all of the extra is an increase on the contract that we have let, but I think that, again, for the sake of openness, we just need to say how much doing everything that people think needs to be done should be there.
Sorry, I have another question. So in section 5.1, it mentions Derby Triangle Development. I am not aware of what that is.
Christine, yeah.
Yeah, so this is, it's an area of land that is, I don't know whether you know the area, it's on the opposite side of Wyvern Retail Park, between the road there and the river, and it's a big area of open land, but in the local plan that's allocated to become office and warehousing development. So this scheme, we've worked with the developer to ensure that when this scheme is built, that they will then have the transport capacity to develop that scheme coming forward.
If there are no more contributions, then what we are being asked to do tonight is to agree recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. We are deferring 2.5 and 2.6 to the confidential items, and also agreeing tonight 2.7. So if that's clear, is everyone agreed? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, are you agreeing the Scrutiny Board recommendations as well?
Noting it. Item 10, Karen?
Thank you. This report relates to the proposed purchase of additional affordable housing on a cross-boundary site, of which there are 700 properties within South Derbyshire and 400 within Derby. Of the 400, under the Section 106, we had negotiated to acquire 74 affordable homes, but with an option to purchase an additional 20 affordable homes. Officers decided to trigger that option, and we entered discussions, and the proposal is for the full 20, of which 18 will be wheelchair accessible and adaptable, and 2 one-bedroom flats. It's proposed that the 18 adapted properties are all exempt from right to buy, so that they can remain as affordable homes for wheelchair users in perpetuity. The 2 one-bedroom flats do not actually meet the criteria for exemption, hence the not the full 20. I know that there was a query with regards last night to valuation at scrutiny, and I can confirm that the valuation that were given by an independent valuer does reflect a bulk purchase, and the values were also reviewed internally and were agreed. So our recommendation is to agree for the purchase to proceed.
Are there any contributions? Councillor Webb?
Can I just welcome these proposals for adapted homes, and it's good to see that 18 out of the 20 dwellings here will be exempt from the right to buy, so it will give us adapted homes for the foreseeable future for disabled people across the city that may have an entitlement to use them. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Skelton?
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome this. I'm sure I'm not alone in having a regular casework with people who are possibly currently in Derby Homes properties, who have become disabled through whatever reason, and need to have a bungalow or a ground floor flat that's adapted for their needs. And the waiting times for people and the stress and distress that causes them is considerable. So I very much welcome this. It's going to be very, very needed.
Councillor Eldred?
Thank you, Chair. And just say we also welcome this and the purchase of these homes. As a Labour group, one of our pledges during the election was to deliver 500 affordable homes for the city for people to either rent or buy by 2020, and obviously this goes a long way towards that target, and I hope that the current administration will keep to that target and keep on with the programme of delivering affordable homes for people across the city.
Youth Mayor?
Thank you. I just want to come out again supporting this, but I do have some reservations, because you do mention on item 3.1 a waiting list, and I presume that waiting list is quite long, and I'm concerned that the amount of affordable housing you have that is that is set out here in this proposal, will it make a significant enough dent on that waiting list? And also, in items 5.3, there is no mention of community's impact assessment, and I feel like that is needed here. I don't know, sorry.
Do we have an officer that could provide either an answer now or to a later date? Karen?
Thank you. We are aware of the waiting list, so we know the numbers. And yes, 20 adapted properties will make an impact, and it will make a difference to the individuals. They are actually tend to be matched. So we do target adapted properties to the people that are in most need of it. So it's all how the how the list works on how they're actually able to apply for the properties. So it will go on eligibility criteria, and then they are assessed, and like I say, it is best match, and it will make a significant difference. It's a lot of properties. With regards to a community impact assessment, that's not something that we generally do tend to do, because we find that because there is such a shortage of adapted properties, they're always welcome. And that we actually see on a day-to-day basis the difference that an adapted property can make on the individuals.
Yes, but I wasn't specifically mentioning the 20 for the adapted. It was more of the 74 that are just affordable housing.
The 74 affordable in the 400. So it's 400 properties that the developer is building, of which 74 will be affordable. That's actually negotiated through the Section 106, which is a planning gain. And it is actually based on a viability assessment that the developer does. So that is how that figure is derived at. It works out that the 74, that's just over 18%. We do like to try and go for a higher percentage, but it is based on viability. And that was why we actually added in the additional 20 properties, because by adding in the extra 20, by taking it up to 94, we then go up to 23.5%. We like to try and our starting point is normally 30%, and that's within the planning policy documents.
Thank you for that explanation. I'm sorry, I was not aware of all those things. Sorry. And yeah, I do agree. Your target of 30% is great. Thank you.
I will say, just to offer some context, it is very difficult. I mean, I was planning committee member for some time, and it is very difficult to deliver those kind of numbers in affordable housing within a scheme sometimes. I think this is, just to give you some context of where, we obviously know this is bordering Mickleover. The South Derbyshire and Derby City, the site is split, and 400, obviously it says in the report, on 4.1 are within Derby City. And it's good to see in 4.7, this being funded via ring fence and HRA, which is what this money should be, being used for, and it will be for within Derby City provision and for Derby City residents. So I think this is something which I'm glad to see has cross-party support. There are challenges moving forward. It's very difficult sometimes to achieve the number of affordable houses within a scheme. And this council and this will obviously pursue as best we can to deliver not only affordable housing, but housing which provides mobility needs and disability needs as well, which is much needed. And I think it's a very positive step forward, and we want to see more of this. So I would ask, if there's no more contributions, for the Cabinet to accept recommendations 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. We all agreed? Okay, thank you. Item 11, final accounts, 2017-18 outturn report for general fund, etc. Don, would you like to introduce, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There are 6 subsets of accounts that make up the Council's overall statement of accounts. And just on that point, Chair, I think it's not mentioned in the report, but I'm pleased to advise Cabinet tonight that our draft statement of accounts for 2017-18 is actually being finalised on time by the end of May. They are published, they're on the website, and they're being passed to our external auditors, and the actual audit of the accounts will start next week. So that was a bit of additional information for you, not included in the report. The headlines in the report are set out from paragraph 1.2. The revenue budget, which is our main general fund, we've got a general fund net revenue budget of about £220 million a year. Pleased to report that the actual outturn on the revenue budget was £2.85 million less than we forecasted we would spend in the year, and that has allowed us to recommend that the £2.85 million underspent is moved into a reserve. We haven't had to use the amount of reserves that we said or thought we would. Within the capital budget and the capital programme, we've got a very big capital programme in Derby. We actually delivered 88.4% of the actual budget of £73 million in year. And within the report, around the shortfall that we didn't deliver on time, the £8.5 million, there is a lot of detail for everything above £200,000 that wasn't delivered for members' benefit. They're set out in section 4.7 of the report. Over the page, the Treasury Management subset of accounts. This is a very technical part of the accounts that we need to report on an annual basis. Basically, what this is advising Cabinet members and members of the public that all the decisions that we make in regard to borrowing and investing the council's and public's money is done with in compliance with the recommended codes of best practice, and the report sets out and makes it very clear that we do so. The other important account, the housing revenue account for our housing stock, that is a ring-fenced account. What we have to do with housing revenue and housing is produce a 30-year business plan. So members and the public might wonder why we've set a budget in 17-18 that was budgeting for a surplus. The reasons for that are very sound, in that in 5 or 6 years into the business plan, financial pressures will be forthcoming against that business plan. So in effect, what we are doing is saving up to fund costs further into the business plan in probably years 5 or 6 onwards. Again, a good outturn. The underspend was slightly less than we budgeted for, which has meant that the reserves balance has been increased slightly in the year as well. The next one is dedicated schools grant. The dedicated schools grant, for a number of years now, the funding for schools is passported straight through local authorities, direct into schools, but we have a very key rule still with schools to make sure that they are spending in line with budget. And again, the report shows a favourable surplus in the dedicated schools grant of 700,000, and that's meant that the overall schools balances have increased slightly across the year, as set out in paragraph 1.8. The final part of the accounts is in relation to our collection fund. That's in relation to council tax collection and business rates collection. We have to make forecasts each year on how much we forecast we collect. We're very good at it for council tax. It's been in the system for many years now, and the volatility around the system now is in business rates, where we collect a very significant amount of money from business ratepayers across the city. But also within the system for business rates, there is the right of appeal, and sometimes some very significant business ratepayers get successful rating appeals, which means they pay less in business rates, and it means that sometimes the volatility around our forecasts can be quite variable. So what the report does set out, though, in relation to the collection fund is that although we've ended up with a collection fund deficit, that's in line with what we were forecasting. So overall, a very prudent position. In the final accounts, there are 14 recommendations, Chair, that are set out in the paper from paragraph 2.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of points to come in on this issue, but maybe we'll take them one at a time, if that's okay. Firstly, the £2.845 million that we didn't spend, that we expected to spend, it was really heartening last night at executive scrutiny to get cross-party support for our recommendation that £2.845 million be transferred to the Welfare Reform Reserve to provide support to residents transferring to universal credit from July 2018. And I just wanted to provide a little bit of context around that recommendation for Cabinet, so that you've got the full picture whilst considering that recommendation. Universal credit will be rolled out in Derby from the start of July 2018, and it represents the biggest change to welfare in a generation in this country. It means for the first time that the majority of benefits that people receive will be rolled into one monthly payment instead of being paid separately. An estimated 28,000 Derby residents will be impacted by these changes, around 50% who are currently claiming in-work benefits such as working tax credits. We know what's happening with universal credit around the rest of the country. There is a mandatory 35-day wait for payments to start, which has been leading to people going into rent arrears, sometimes being made homeless or being evicted from their homes. We've had reports of hunger in some areas. The introduction of universal credit has led to an immediate 30% increase in the use of food banks in those areas, towns and cities. People have been forced to take out loans, either payday loans at high interest, or loans against their benefit payments, which means they're then paying those back over a 12-month period. There's also reports of very draconian sanctions being imposed on people, both in work, people who are in work but having sanctions imposed on them, and those who are looking for work. So currently in Derby, we have a fantastic welfare reform team who provide frontline support for people who are in crisis. And we have the Welfare Reform Reserve, and around 60% of the costs of that team are funded from the Welfare Reform Reserve, but that reserve is diminishing at the same time as demand is expected to increase with the rollout of universal credit, and there will be more people in crisis and needing that direct intervention. So we're also, from July, going to be taking on the responsibility of the Universal Support Service, which is providing people with budgeting support and personal budgeting support and technical assistance with applying for universal credit. However, that work is drastically underfunded, and the welfare support team are having to put their own resource into that, increasing the pressure on that team. So that is why we believe it is really, really important that the money, the 2.845 million, is transferred into that welfare reform reserve to provide the support of the front line that people need, whether it be direct intervention or supporting the team to signpost people to other services, training, skills development, whatever they need in order to transition smoothly to universal credit. Obviously, there was a very good discussion last night at executive scrutiny about this, and there was a good recommendation came from that. Following that, Chair, what we have done, and I apologise, I didn't send this to you because I didn't realise that you would be chairing, but I did send it to the Leader of the Council. We fleshed out our proposal in terms of how that money could be spent, some of what I've outlined here, and how that money would be spent and how that money could be utilised to support some of the most vulnerable people in the city as they transition to universal credit. So I can circulate those to people here for your consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Eldred. Are there any other contributions at this stage? Do you want to have a moment to read that sheet? I will say, from my point of view, obviously I've only just seen sight of this other document here. I think we're careful not to dismiss the recommendations from scrutiny, but to note them and consider them moving forward in budgetary discussions with senior officers, and of course certainly moving forward when considering the medium-term financial plan. And I think that's the position we're in at the moment. So I would be putting that towards the report towards Cabinet for approval, 2.1 through to 2.14. Are we agreed?
Come back. I appreciate that. I'm not quite sure what it means to note a recommendation, and that's just would appreciate some clarity around that. But also just to highlight the fact that putting this into budget considerations is actually leaving it too late. Universal credit is coming from July, and the reason why we didn't put this as something that should be considered, or executive scrutiny didn't put it as something that should be considered in the MTFP, is the fact that people are going to be needing this support and assistance from July onwards. And if we wait until the budget round this year to be implemented in May next year, that will be too late, and people will already be seeing the impacts of universal credit. So there is an urgency to this, Chair, that I think needs to be considered, hence the nature of the recommendation.
I'll clarify that then, Councillor Eldred. we're certainly minded to note and take on board the recommendations in terms of what you've given us tonight, but I'll clarify to say the short-term discussions with senior officers in terms of this issue and the recommendations from the Scrutiny Commission, coupled with work towards the medium-term financial plan. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I appreciate what the Scrutiny Board have come forward with and what Lisa has just given us tonight, I actually think that we need to wait and see actually what happens if this money is put back into the reserves. This is a moving picture and we don't actually know what will happen. It could be as disastrous as it has been in some areas. It could be the opposite of that. And I think what we have to have a look at is, as it's moving picture, we have to wait and see whether the universal credit advances or the budgeting advances are actually working for the residents. And if not, then I think we can review that as it's going along in terms of the amount of support that's being asked for from our services as we currently have them. So at this present time, Chair, I'd be minded to say thank you very much, but we need to keep a watching brief on this one.
Agree with that and be ready to act if required to do so in consultation with senior officers. Okay, so recommendations 2.1 through to 2.14, are we agreed? Okay, item 12, delivering enhanced activities to support street pride services. Mr. Gartside.
Thank you, Chair. The report in front of you seeks to secure additional funding to support enhanced service delivery by Street Pride and to build additional resilience into those services. The report sets out a number of areas where a relatively small amount of money targeted in a particular way will improve the council's ability to cut grass in public spaces, to empty street litter bins and to maintain the cleanliness of the city centre. The report also sets out a proposed responsive team to enhance the speed at which we are able to deal with matters of fly tipping. It's important to stress that the report sets out improvements that effectively require additional people to deliver these services, and that's where the resilience is going to be built in. The report seeks approval for an £185,000 of additional funding from reserves for this year, but I implore members to consider that as part of the budget setting process for future years, that if possible that funding is secured ongoing. Thank you.
Councillor Eldred.
He's already forgotten my name. Look at that. So just a couple of things. I just wonder whether or not this £185,000 includes the deep clean of the city that was included in the Conservative manifesto. We did ask this last night, but obviously officers weren't able to answer that question, Councillor Holmes, because it was one of your manifesto pledges, and also whether or not that deep clean, if it's not included, has actually been costed, and whether or not we're looking at a deep clean of the whole city or just the city centre. And whether, so if you could give me some clarity around that, that would be useful. Also, whether or not one of the issues that is faced in our parks, and particularly in my ward, in Darley Park, is around bins and the provision of bins, and whether or not this £185,000 includes the provision to improve bins in parks to make them more enjoyable places to be, and to reduce the public health risk that has been alerted to us by residents. So that's my question around that.
Councillor Smell will follow this, but I'll just say in an overarching sense, wrapping it all up really in terms of manifesto pledges, clearly we're working very hard to deliver our manifesto pledges, and obviously that work includes working towards how we will be funding them. It's ongoing work, it's challenging work, but we're very confident that our manifesto pledges will be funded and delivered. Details in due course. Councillor Smell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Eldred. Yeah, this particular report is separate to the manifesto pledge, that we have promised. So this £185,000 will be welcomed across all 17 wards. And as you've talked about, obviously, bins on Darley Park, that also includes the bins as well for all the parks. This is a city-wide initiative, so it will be fair. And obviously, I think all the wards across Derby, obviously, have seen an increase in grass levels, bins being collected on the parks or near city hubs or such as shopping areas. So this is something that we very much applaud, and I think the residents of Derby will see a benefit moving forward coming on. Backing up with what the Chair said with regards to our manifesto pledge, that is something that we're currently costing up with officers right now, and that will be something that will be later announced moving forward to discuss about the City Clean, and all the details will be coming out in due course to explain what areas of the city will be cleaned and then how it will be costed and how it will be budgeted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smale. Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome this extra resource being put in. Since obviously the previous level had been instated, there has indeed been a lot of complaints, even from areas that are considered more clean normally. Fly tipping and the such is not just restricted to areas, certain areas of the city, it's across the whole of the city. And we really do need to do something about the culture that people that have sort of adopted that, well, if I want to throw it out, I'll just toss it onto the street. We really do need to attack that as well as actually improving levels of grass cutting, bin emptying, etc., etc.
Councillor Graves.
Thank you. Just to say that I welcome this report. Any extra money on helping with cleaning the streets in Street Pride has got to be good. It's got to be good for the city. It makes the city look better. And I think that's what we should do. Bearing in mind one of the pledges from the previous administration was to be the cleanest city in England. I think this actually shows that there is some commitment to achieving that.
Thank you, it's welcomed. I think I'll say that, obviously this is just the start of our plans and there's more to come. And I would like to state that this and many other things which we're going to be taking forward will be approached in the manner that it will be fairly distributed, and the resources will be offered to the city in a fair way. And I think that's a change which we certainly on this side of the chamber will very much welcome, and I think the taxpayers of this city, council taxpayers of this city and residents in the various communities around the city who may feel that they didn't have necessarily a good deal over the last few years will see a step change, and I think that'll be very positive. But as I say, this is just the start. So 2.1 recommendation, are we all agreed? Great. Item 13, performance monitoring 17-18. Christine.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the provisional year-end performance results for 2017-18. We do usually report this towards the end of July, but we brought it forward to be in line with the revised deadline for the accounts. We do expect to bring the Council's annual report, which will include the final year-end figures, to Cabinet in August. But just to give some summary headlines, the latest performance monitoring for the final quarter to the end of March shows 54% of the council scorecard measures achieved. This is generally consistent with last year, but it does show slippage from our forecast of 64% at quarter 3. So there is still improvements that we can make around profiling and setting of those targets. 47 out of the 50 pledges are completed or on track, and full details are provided in Appendix 2 of your report. And 3 areas of slippage are shown in paragraph 4.9. Dashboard of all of the measures are shown in Appendix 3, and the improvement report relating to those that are not on track can be found at Appendix 4. There are some highlights that it's worth picking out for Cabinet. Adoption timeliness is improving, so 62% of children are waiting 16 months or less for adoption, which has improved from 45% last year. The Council was successful in getting 100% of its special educational needs statements converted to education health plans by the 31st of March. In safeguarding adults, over 80% of referrals have a safety plan in place at the initial inquiry stage, which again shows an improved performance. We have increasing efficiency with more customers that are contacting the Council using existing online services, with over 97,000 transactions in the last year. And in terms of the Council's sickness absence, whilst it's not as good as we would like it to be, the outturn figure of 12.8 days compares to an end-year figure of 14.2 days in 2016-17. So it does demonstrate that we are heading in the right direction with regard to supporting staff back to work. So ultimately, we know there are areas the Council needs to improve, and they are highlighted from paragraph 415 within the report. You'll also notice that a number of these have been considered by scrutiny over the last 12 months, and again within the report we've included a review of the executive scrutiny improvement activity. So just in conclusion, Council is asked to note the report, give particular attention to areas for improvement and the actions that have been taken to address performance, and also to note that the annual report will come back to Cabinet in August. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to reiterate what the Acting Chief Executive has just highlighted, really, in relation to the good news in this report, and specifically 4.16, which relates to sickness absence. It emanated last year in the cross-party committee for personnel, where we brought forward a sickness absence policy, which has been put into place over the last 12 months. And subsequently has been looked at as well by scrutiny. And it just goes to show that once we actually get our teeth into something and draw the staff members along with us, together with the managers, together with politicians from across the parties, that we can actually achieve something by starting to bring this figure down. Yes, it's not good enough yet, but we are heading in the right direction, and so I think it's an achievement for all of us to be proud of, including staff members, including managers, that we are making a difference with this, and it will impact upon our costs in relation to agency staff in the coming months, hopefully. Thank you.
Councillor Graves, if I may, can I just bring Councillor Williams in first?
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I just want to draw your attention back to the item on timeliness of adoptions. I would like to say thank you very much to both the staff and indeed my opposition cabinet members for pushing this and making sure that this is one that is absolutely getting better, and I pledge that we will continue to move on this because this is one of the most important outcomes that we can get for our looked after children. So again, I want to say thank you very much for the hard work that's been put in by everybody, because to me it's really, really important one, and I want to see this continuing. Thank you.
That's very welcome, and can that be minuted, please? Councillor Graves, then Councillor Skelton.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight, as in the scrutiny report, about the green light on the A52. I mean, I mentioned in my earlier speech about some perplexities. That is one of the things that perplexes us, that it was given a green light on the 31st of March as being all hunky-dory. And I just hope that that information is provided to the investigation team so that we can understand what's gone wrong.
I'll pass on to Christine in a second. I think just the technical note of that is, regardless of that issue, which clearly it has become one, and it isn't green, there is a time lag. So obviously we were aware of the issues with the A52 project on day one, taking control, and our view at that point would have been your view as a fellow councillor, that the scorecards, if you like, would say it was green. But clearly there's a time lag there. Obviously, if we looked at it right now, if we pulled that particular stat out now, it wouldn't be green. Could you offer some context to that, Christine?
I think it's really as is reported, up until the 31st of March, there was no indication that there were significant issues here, and it notes within the report that a report would be coming to this cabinet. But I think it is a fair observation that has been made by a number of people.
I'm sure that will be investigated as part of the ongoing work. Councillor Skelton.
Thank you. I just want to draw people's attention to the supposed success. 100% of statements converted to AHCP prior or by the 31st of March. While technically that has been achieved, it has not been, quality has not been achieved. We are still getting a lot of complaints from parents with extremely poor quality EHCPs. And, you know, whatever anybody tells me on this bit of paper, I'm sorry, that doesn't match the reality.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Can we explore that, Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. At exec scrutiny last night, we considered a forward plan for performance items for exec scrutiny. And the first item, because of the significance of this, and because there has been quite rightly a lot of scrutiny and concern and interest in this area, that the first item that will be coming to the performance agenda in July will be EHCPs and the issues around quality and impact since the statutory deadline of the 31st of March. I would just like to say, though, just in terms of some reassurance, a couple of points really. The actual number of official complaints that we've received since the deadline of the 31st of March is less than a dozen. And I think my advice would always be to any elected member, if you have any concerns through your casework being raised by parents or carers about EHCPs, about SEND, or indeed about any aspect of the service, if you could let me know or my senior team know, then we will respond to that. And finally, we are working very closely and very effectively with parent carers together and working on developing or co-producing a quality assurance process and really thinking about how we effectively engage with parents going forward as part of the overall SEND reforms.
Councillor Skelton.
Will, if I could ask Andy through you, Chair, will you be consulting and working together in co-production with all parent groups that are established within the city?
I think we have a SEND strategic board, and our interface with parents is through the recognised parent carers together. But parent carers together are working with other groups in the city, but we use parent carers together as the conduit in terms of gathering the voice of parents and carers across Derby.
Some assurance, Councillor Skelton. I mean, work with our lead members on this. We know you're pushing an open door. We want this to be right too. So let's work together on it to ensure that we do the right thing and get everything in place and everybody's looked after. Okay, so any more contributions? Okay, so we're noting 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Agreed? Okay. Item 14, compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. Don?
Thank you, Chair. There are 6 recommendations included in the report that require a decision from Cabinet, and that's in line with our contract and financial procedure rules. If I can go straight to the recommendations from paragraph 2, Chair. The first one is seeking approval to transfer £877,000 to a newly created reserve, and that is from the 1% council tax increase in 18-19, and it will be used to fund prudential borrowing in our capital programme at some stage in the future. The second one is to seek approval for £68,000 from our budget risk reserve to provide some additional resource within our risk management team. This is seen to be a requirement. It's been flagged up as a weakness in the Council within our corporate improvement plan, and indeed it was included in the External Auditor Section 24 report last year. The third one is asking for approval for £18,500 from budget risk to actually provide funding for the purchase of a scanning machine in our Council House security service within the post room. Fourth one is to transfer some land and property at the Beaufort Business Centre, which is standing empty in Derwent Ward, and the request is to seek approval to move the appropriate land and building from our general fund to housing revenue account with the intention of building some new council houses as soon as we're able to. The fifth one is asking for approval for £100,000 to be transferred from our budget risk reserve to actually fund some surveying work for our property stock in order to comply with insurance cover. And the final one over the page, Chair, is seeking approval to enter a procurement process for the usage of prepayment cards, primarily in our people's care services functions, and the cost of that is estimated to be £50,000 per year that we'd be able to fund on a self-financing basis, because once it's introduced, there will be forthcoming savings. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Chair. There's two of the recommendations that I'd like to pick up on. Firstly, 2.1, the transfer to reserves of £877,000, which came as a direct result of the 1% increase in council tax. When the Labour administration proposed the 1% increase in council tax, it was at that point intended for prudential borrowing to fund future borrowing, but that was very specifically linked to the development of a new performance venue on the Assembly Room site, and we were very open and transparent about that was what that money would be used for. It feels a little bit like this is squirreling money away without any details as to what the borrowing will be for, and I think that the people of Derby deserve an explanation or and some detail around what the current administration tends to borrow for, and when that is likely to be, and also whether or not it is the intention to put this 1% aside every year into a fund for prudential borrowing, or whether or not this is a one-off. And I think some clarity around that would be helpful, and is also backed up by one of the recommendations from the Executive Scrutiny Board. So that's the first thing. The second element is the procurement of a prepaid card scheme. And I think, it is right that there are a large number of authorities who have instigated this kind of prepaid card scheme for care leavers, people in receipt of direct payments, etc. But I think that it would be very risky to go straight to approving a procurement process for such a scheme when we have done absolutely no consultation with stakeholders. There's been no consultation with care leavers, there's been no consultation with people in receipt of direct payments. We don't know whether or not people would welcome this as a way forward. We don't know what their response would be. We don't know what the pros and cons of a scheme would be. And in fact, there's no detail in this report about what such a scheme would entail and how it would work. Although it has been introduced in over probably half of local authorities across the country, there is some current research that suggests it reduces the choice and control of customers and service users to such extent that it risks contravening the Care Act. So I think that before we go ahead, we need to have some robust consultation with stakeholders on this and actually make sure that we're doing something which is legal and sound and is not going to contravene our obligations under the Care Act. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll bring Councillor Williams in shortly. I'll just deal with the Scrutiny Board's recommendations 1 and 2. 1 regards to support for the previous administration's plan for the new performance venue. Well, I can't accept that recommendation. Our options as an administration are broader, and in due course we'll be making it clear what we plan to do moving forward. In recommendation 2, well, I'll note it. It's, or I recommend for the Cabinet to note it. Not rule it out, but be part of the medium-term financial plan. I'll bring in Councillor Williams in regards to the prepaid cards and obviously bringing in as well the recommendation 3 from scrutiny last night.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of no consultation, there has been informal discussions with groups about possible changes. But also I think what we have to look at is that, you know, there are 110 local authorities that have already done this. It does stop people carrying wads of cash around with them, which I think is a security risk. I think it also normalises what it is practiced by people in terms of having what is effectively a debit card to be able to use. I do agree that, you know, there are some instances where there could be issues that people might spend it on something that we might not necessarily approve of. However, I think this is a way forward, and I don't agree with the recommendation to not approve the procurement. So I would like Cabinet to actually go ahead with the procurement of this prepaid scheme.
If there are no more contributions, I'll just add to the Councillor Williams's contribution there. Williams. Officers will be on hand to support the transition, and there is a robust plan in place. So I'm happy to ask Cabinet to agree to recommendations 2.1 through to 2.6. Are we agreed? Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, I need to say this blurb legally, that under section 100 brackets A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public to be excluded from the meeting during the discussion of the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exception outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Thank you. We do require, just for clarity, the public gallery to be cleared and the press to leave us for now. Thank you.